Opening slide graphic text title, Nurturing Opportunities for Friendship, with Zana, Lutfiyya. Images of Zana, Lutfiyya, text, Purpose Matters Conference, logos, belonging matters and talks that matter.net.
I'm very, very pleased to be here. And I want to start by acknowledging the land that I live on here in Manitoba, Canada. And this land has been governed by what we call Treaty 1, and it is the traditional homeland of the Dene, the Anishinaabe, and Sioux peoples, and it is also the homeland of the Métis Nation. And so we are learning the importance of our history and how to make amends. So this morning, I want to talk a little bit about creating and nurturing opportunities for friendship. And going to start with what I call the basics. I'm not really going to talk much about these points, but rather say these are the assumptions that I start off with. And that is, first of all, that humans need a range of freely given and chosen relationships, including friendship. It's life-sustaining for us. So there's lots of people who write about how important, why this is important and so on, but I start with that as a given. The second point is that people with disabilities often have fewer opportunities to discover and pursue activities, hobbies, occupations, things that are of interest to them, and to develop those interests. Now, this means that they then have fewer opportunities to meet people who might share similar interests, people who they would have things to talk about, do things with, and so on. And then that in turn reduces their opportunities to develop connections with other people. And finally, is that we can't make friends for people as much as we'd like to do that. But what we can do are create and nurture opportunities for a range of relationships and connections. So I want to focus the rest of my presentation on these opportunities and what we might do to nurture them for the people we care about. And I think a huge source of opportunities comes from what Wolfensberger called personal social integration and valued social participation. So if there are those of you who've studied social role valorization theory, you'll be familiar with this concept. It's one of the 10 themes of normalization of SRV theory that Wolf wrote about. And there are things, you can go look this up and read more about it. But this really refers to the personal experience individuals have of being socially connected to other people, whether as individuals or in groups, families, and so on. And valued participation is the role they play, within these activities. And that really provides a huge opportunity for people to get out there and rub shoulders with other people, get to know other people. And it's important to consider, if you will, all of our life areas or life domains. And so think about family, preschool, and school, what people do after they leave school, especially as young adults, in terms of further education, travel, work, exploration, like the gap year, that I think a lot of young people take, and then the world of work. And then in addition to all of that, civic life is what I call it, interest groups, clubs, associations, faith communities, and so on. Those are the places where we meet people and where people get to know us and we get to know them. And it's not enough to simply help people get to those groups and, sort of just take part in them, but we need to have repeated, meaningful interactions with others over time. And one of the ways to do this is by way of, again, what Wolfensberger called valued social roles. Angela Amato also talks about this using slightly different language. And that is, when we're involved in activities, what roles are we taking on? You know, what role will I play in the setting? Or the person I'm thinking about, what role will they play in the setting? Because that determines how other people will see them and interact with them. And so it can be a large entree into opportunities for doing things with people. And so, these questions that I have here are questions to consider. Where might I, or where might the person I'm concerned about, see the same people in the same place over time? And how will they get involved with others in meaningful ways? And then what roles will they take on? Now, I know here in Canada, for a lot of people, especially people with intellectual disabilities, the answer to these questions goes like this. They are going to see the same people in the same place for years. And these are going to be the people who are in their segregated classroom in high school. And then when they finish high school and they move on to a day program, there's going to be a lot of the same people they see day after day. And so for those individuals, they're participating in a world that is often closed off for at least part of their day from the rest of us. And so they spend almost all of their time with other people who are service recipients. That creates one set of opportunities for people in terms of who they get to know and what they do. And if we think about this differently, in terms of what might they be interested in and what are the other opportunities in their community to meet other people, that starts to create different opportunities. So the first thing to really think about is, what are the opportunities people have now? And if that remains the same, what's likely going to happen in the future? One of the questions I'm often asked is, what if the person has few interests? We don't know what they're interested in. And I think for some individuals, there's the sad truth that they haven't been able to explore the world, explore their community, get to know their neighbors, and figure out what they might actually be interested in. And so I think if that's the case for the person you're supporting, whether it's a family member or someone you're supporting, it's important to sit down, I think, with them and to think about, what are the gifts that this person brings with her or him? Like, what are the gifts? Who is this person? What do people really appreciate about this person? So as one example, I have a friend, Jackie, and I've been a citizen advocate for Jackie for over 30 years. And I will say one of the gifts she brings is honesty. She just tells you like it is. And sometimes it would be a lot more comfortable for me if she didn't do that, didn't tell me the truth or didn't tell other people the truth. But it's just part and parcel of who she is. And I have come to really appreciate it. And I think it's important to acknowledge that that is a gift that she has. There's no dissembling with her. She'll just tell it like it is. And so you know where you are when you're with her. And so if you identify the gifts that the person has, or at least some of the ones that you're aware of, identify or start to identify potential activities and opportunities to explore with the person. Because sometimes people just haven't had all that many opportunities. And so, what might that be? I remember talking to a teacher, and she had two students. This was middle school. And these two boys just were always getting into fights, literal fist fights. And she was a tall woman. And one day she picked them up off the floor where they were wrestling with each other, she said, by the napes of their necks. And she said to them, "You need to stop this. You need to stop this. Put them down." And they were so startled by her intervention. But anyway, she started spending time talking with them. And she was surprised that one of the things they were really interested in was going to a fancy restaurant. That's what they called it, a fancy restaurant. And she said, "Well, what do you mean by a fancy restaurant?" And they said, "Where you sit at a table and they bring you a sheet of paper with the food and you get to choose from the sheet of paper." They didn't even know it was called a menu. Right. So they wanted to go to, what a lot of kids that age call a menu restaurant. And so she said, "Okay, let's do that. Who would you like to invite to go with you to a menu restaurant, from your class?" And that began a very different kind of conversation with these students and with others in their class about what they're interested in. And out of that came, these boys were interested in soccer, but no one had ever taught them how to play. And they never had that opportunity. And then she started looking at, how do you help two guys join a soccer team? And I don't know, I assume it's the same in Australia, but here there's lots of soccer for kids. And she got them, she helped their parents to enroll them in soccer. And then they got to learn a sport, which they were keenly interested in, and meet other kids who were also very interested in soccer. Are they going to meet their best friend for life playing soccer? Maybe, maybe not. But what I do know is now these two boys had some opportunities that they didn't have before. They had a valued role, learning how to play soccer, learning how to be a team member, learning how to get along with other kids. And they belonged to a team. And that was really important for them. So that's, thinking about those opportunities. What are the opportunities for people? How can we help them access those opportunities and make sure they take part in the opportunities in ways that lead to valued roles and the chance to spend time with others? I think another thing to consider, if you're not sure what the person might be interested in, is to think about their already existing connections. Who are they already connected to? And is there a way to help deepen or expand those existing connections? Sometimes it takes an invitation, talking to someone or thinking this through. But that's just another possibility of getting to know a person a little bit better and helping them think of things, interests, activities they might be interested in, or people they might like to spend time with. So what are those existing connections and how might we build on those? And here are some thoughts I have around preparing for the setting, or supporting people to be able to take up these different opportunities. And so the first is to prepare for the setting and the activity. So back when I was in grad school, I shared a home with two other grad students, and they were both really into aerobics, which was a big thing back in the mid-'80s. And one of my housemates joined a pretty swanky gym, and she came home in short order with a silver lycra bodysuit and silver tights. She had the little knee warmers. So just think about those old Jane Fonda videos. And after she had her aerobics classes at this gym, they all went to the little cafe at the gym and had green tea and other healthful drinks. Now, my other roommate, Barb, went to the local community center where they wore loose-fitting clothing, took yoga mats, and their weights were tomato paste tins, soup tins, and then big vegetable tins. And so they had different sizes and different weights. So she went out shopping, came back with the right size of tins, and she went to her aerobics class dressed in these loose-fitting clothes and used the little tins as the weights. And so I think it's important, if we're helping someone explore different opportunities, to do a little bit of homework to figure out, how do things work in this setting? Because if you wear the silver lycra bodysuit and go to the community center, you're not going to fit in. They're going to notice you. And likewise, if you go with your tomato paste tins as weights to the gym, you're going to stand out, and not in a good way. And so sometimes I think we need to remind ourselves that it's important to pay attention to the setting and figure out a little bit about how things work there, so that we can help the person, prepare the person a little bit for that. Because no one likes to go into a setting and realize that they don't know how it works, and they don't fit in, and they're not sure what to do. Likewise, I think it's important to prepare for the valued social role that you're thinking about with the person, or that the person is interested in. And so sometimes this is thinking about what are the role possibilities that are available to people. And I think people in certain settings think about this without using this language. So as one example, a man I knew for many years who sadly passed away a few months ago, Bob Mallow, many years ago now, over 30 years ago, expressed an interest that he would like to attend church. And he had a citizen advocate, and Greg introduced Bob. Greg had already introduced Bob to his mom, Greg's mom, who attended a church, and Bob's mom. Oh, I'm so confused. Sorry about that. Greg's mother lived in the same neighborhood as Bob did, and so she invited him to attend church with her. And Bob became a member of that congregation for over 30 years. And it was a very important source, a meaningful place for him in terms of his spiritual development, meeting people, and so on. And one of the roles he acquired when he was a congregant at this church was that of porter. So he was asked to help greet people when they came to the service and hand out the paper order of service for the day. And he took that role very seriously. And within the Catholic Church, there is this role of porter. And at the funeral, the priest explained, this is the role not only to greet people and welcome them to the service, but the porter also paid attention to make sure that everyone who was in the confines of the church were safe from any potential danger outside. And he said Bob was recognized by the congregation as a porter, not just as a greeter, but as a porter, as someone who welcomed people in and paid attention to what was going on outside the church as a form of protection. And the priest said, and we really respected Bob when he played that role. That was something that was important to us. He made a contribution to our church. And so that's a valued social role that Bob had. There were others that he had, but that was one role that was recognized and appreciated by others. Sometimes in some settings, it can be helpful to discuss and even rehearse as needed tips on being with others and making a good impression. And sometimes you start to see this and not sure how to raise it as an issue. So I'll give you an example from a couple friends of mine. I had a friend whose name was Bertha. Bertha had lived with Down syndrome, and a lot of the experiences we're all too familiar with. She lost her mother at a young age, ended up in the institution, got out when her sisters were old enough to bring her out. And when I knew her, she was living in her own apartment. And this was me and a friend of mine, Nancy, and we were going out for supper one night. We invited Bertha to join us. And one of the things Bertha did was she liked chewing gum, and she liked to chew gum. And when it lost its flavor, she would stuff another piece of gum into her mouth. And so she would have a huge wad of gum in her mouth. And at the supper table, she would remove the wad of gum, stick it on her plate, eat her meal, and then stick that wad of gum back in her mouth. And I have to say, I died 1,000 deaths every time she did this. But anyway, there we were, the three of us, we were going into a menu restaurant. We were actually going out to a pretty nice restaurant for dinner. And we get half a block from the restaurant where I'd parked the car, and we walked by a trash can, and Nancy stopped and pointed at it and said, and handed Bertha a piece of paper. And Nancy had been chewing gum, and she put the gum in this piece of paper, wrapped it up, put it in the trash can, and looked at Bertha and said, ditto. you do the same. And Bertha said, why? And Nancy said, in nice restaurants, they don't like people chewing gum. They think it's kind of gross. So we're going to get rid of the gum here. And if you want gum after the meal, after we leave, you can have it. Bertha said, okay. We went in, had a lovely meal, left, and that was it, And Bertha remembered that little lesson. And it did affect how other people saw her. So just one small example of how do we help people put their best foot forward. Another thing around supporting people is asking questions or answering questions other people in the setting might have. Do they have questions? Answer them. Be truthful, be honest, but also as much as possible, be fair to the person you're thinking about. And sometimes the questions are pretty straightforward. It's just something they had never thought of. Accompany the person. It can be really important to go with a person to a setting, just to see how things work, make sure things are okay. You may have to do this more than once. You may choose to do this with the person all the time. Invite others to become involved. I think that's really important. When we think about ourselves, how do we get to know people? We meet people, excuse me, and then we invite them out for a cup of coffee or for lunch or for another activity. Sometimes it blossoms into a relationship or a connection. Sometimes it doesn't. But thinking about inviting. And finally, my last point is to build mutuality and contribution. Think about ways that the person can make a valid contribution, like Bob did in his role as church porter. And think about mutuality. A lot of researchers, when they write about friendship, talk about reciprocity, that there has to be an exact and equal exchange between the friends. However, when I've interviewed people about their friendships, they don't talk about that. They do acknowledge the contributions from their friends, and they say, we don't give the same things, but we give things that I value from them, and I hope what I give them, they value from me. And that mutuality. And so it's just a bit of a different way to think about this, but contribution. So those are the things to consider when supporting people. And then finally, there's just the two references I referred to. And the Amato book is actually available for free online. So you can just Google that, find it, and download it. Thank you very much.
Closing slide graphic text with thanks to Zana Lutfiyya, Crowd Comms Purpose Matters Conference 2022. This video was made possible with the support of an information and capacity building grant through the Department of Social Services, produced by Belonging Matters. Belonging Matters makes every effort to provide accurate and up-to-date material. However, information is subject to change, and are materials for reference only. This video was filmed on the land of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation. Logos, Belonging Matters, talksthatmatter.net.
Graphic text. More Purpose Matters conference videos. To watch more videos from the Purpose Matters conference, please head to free videos on the Talks That Matter website, talksthatmatter.net. Logos, Belonging Matters, Talks That Matter.